rest for your entire life, the heart has to beat continually. And if the heart stops, we stop. And we certainly don't want that. So how do we keep the heart strong? The heart is actually simply comprised of many tiny heart muscle cells. And so all those muscle cells need to cooperate together and contract together and also relax together in order for there to be a proper functioning of the heart to move the blood through the body. And every cell needs energy to function. So each one of these muscle cells themselves, even though these muscle cells are actually moving the blood through your body to nourish all the other cells in your body, but the heart cells themselves also need to be nourished by that same blood. And it's through what comes through the blood that those cells can actually produce energy that we actually can be alive. By the way, if anybody has any questions at any time throughout this presentation, please do not hesitate to raise your hand and ask. So the primary energy that comes to our body is generally in the form of glucose. So our food is broken down by our digestive tract, and it ultimately breaks it down into a form called glucose. It's a sugar. There are many different kinds of sugars, but glucose is the main one that our body uses for energy. And you might have heard of a hormone, insulin, that's produced in the body, and it enables glucose to cross the cell membrane and enter into the cell. So insulin is a very important hormone that's absolutely necessary for the glucose to get into the cell, and unless the glucose gets in the cell's not going to have any energy, and the cell can't do the job that it was designed to do without that energy. So this is actually very, very important. And so we need to consider these things. Glucose is then processed, once it enters the cell, through what's called a 20-step pathway. And that 20-step pathway produces 2 units of energy, which doesn't sound like very much energy for a 20-step process. Now, does it? But it also produces something as part of that. It's called a pyruvate. And pyruvate is a different chemical form of sugar. And that pyruvate is then put into the powerhouse of the cell. And that pyruvate is then used as a fuel that feeds an 8-step pathway. And that 8-step pathway actually produces an amazing 36 units of energy. So if you could go through a 20-step process and produce 2 units of energy, or if you could go through an 8-step pathway and produce 36 units of energy, which one would you choose? I would go for the one that's producing 36 units of energy, because you're going to have a lot more energy and you're going to feel a lot better, and all of your body is going to operate a lot better. So what do we need to do to feed this 8-step pathway? What makes the difference between the two? It's actually oxygen. Oxygen is what fuels the 8-step pathway. It's aerobic, but it's actually a slow process, while the 20-step pathway is anaerobic. It doesn't require oxygen for that pathway, but it's much faster. And it's the feeding system. The 20-step pathway, again, produces the pyruvate that then feeds the 8-step pathway. And they actually cooperate together and interact together in the body. But we can influence these pathways. So the heart, just like every other cell, the heart muscle cells need to receive sufficient oxygen, and if they do, then they will be stronger and they will pump that blood much more efficiently. And then all of the things and the nutrients and the oxygen that need to get to all of your cells of your body will be moved through your body more efficiently, while the waste products will be taken away more efficiently. And then the heart itself will actually operate more efficiently, and it actually becomes a system that builds on itself, either in a positive way or a negative way, depending on how we're influencing it. And our decisions influence how this system operates. How do we get the sufficient oxygen to the heart? Well, of course, it starts with proper breathing. If we're not breathing properly, then we're limiting the supply of oxygen, And without the oxygen, you're only going to have your 20-step process that's only producing 2 units of energy, and you're going to be tired and sluggish. But with the oxygen, then that system gets supercharged. It becomes that fuel that burns in your cell. And so to breathe properly, we're actually supposed to use our abdominal muscles. Our abdominal muscles, and to do deep breaths down into our abdomen. But most people today have really become high chest breathers. And we take little breaths in our chest, and that is giving us some oxygen and some air, but it's much more limited for when you're really actually engaging in deep breathing deliberately. And one of the key things that actually leads to not using our abdomen muscles is poor posture. And many, many people today have developed poor posture. And we often sit at our desks and look at our devices, and we're hunched over, and we're actually constricting and limiting our abdomen muscles so that we're actually limiting our breathing. By the way, there was a health crisis that came upon our world recently that led us to adopt some preventative measures that were covering our mouth. And do you think that increases the amount of oxygen that's getting to your lungs, or do you think it decreases the amount of oxygen that's getting to your lungs? Sadly, it decreases it. So it does have other health consequences, even though there may have been reasons why people chose to do that at the time. But we need to consider that getting good, fresh air into our lungs is important. So even the air within our house can get very stale very quickly if we're not taking the opportunity to open our windows and allow the air to come through.
Nice job. I need to announce that the people that have their cards in here, they're going to still do the drawing at 3. They don't have to have them. If there's any of you in here that still have your cards that have not been signed by this area or any of the others, that part doesn't matter. It's just they're going to do the drawing at 3 o'clock. So I'll just take the cards, anybody that has not turned them in, and I'll make sure that you get into the drawing. Thank you. Sorry, thanks.
Thank you, brother. So yes, if you want to be entered into the drawing to win a Fitbit, please make sure you give him your card. So getting good ventilation into our living spaces really increases the oxygen content in the air that we're breathing, and this is going to help fuel your body working properly. Even better is getting outside and spending time in this beautiful creation that God made for us. And actually, the more we get away from man-made structures and the closer we get to natural structures, those plants that are in nature are actually giving off oxygen. And that actually, just going out for a walk in a natural area will naturally not only be more peaceful and enjoyable, but it actually will provide more oxygen. That will start making you feel good and actually giving you energy. Actually, quite a lot of energy. Another thing that's very common today is actually people tend to wear clothes that are too tight fitting. And if your waistband is too tight, then your abdomen cannot expand and contract properly, and that's actually going to affect your breathing, and that will affect your oxygen levels, and that will affect your energy levels and how you're feeling, and also actually even the proper operation of your heart. It really is ideal if you could get your fist between your body and your waistband. And if you can't, then the clothes are potentially too tight fitting. So we want to avoid being high chest breathers to get a lot of oxygen. We need strong core muscles in order to do that breathing, and we also to have proper posture. All of your abdomen muscles attach to your spine. And so actually, the stronger the muscles you are, it will naturally pull you back and give you better posture, and that will enable you to actually make, to have better breathing, and thus to get more oxygen. So anything we can do to strengthen our core muscles is certainly a tremendous benefit for us. And you can ask any massage therapist, and they can tell you the stronger the core muscles in the person, they know that that person is a healthier person. They go together. Of course, exercise and stretching help strengthen our core muscles. And ultimately, any exercise is better than no exercise. A lot of people might be already in poor health, and doing some exercise might be something that itself is very challenging. Other people might say, well, I'm just too busy to do any exercise. But even going for a short walk for 10 minutes is better than doing nothing. And actually, the more we keep moving and doing some type of exercise, even if it's just upper body exercise, any type of exercise is better than none, and the more we do, the more we will be able to do. So, and actually, morning is better than later in the day. When we get our heart rate up, when we get our breathing improving, and we get this oxygen burning in our cells, it actually ends up having an effect on our bodies over the course of the entire day. It also has the benefit, if you actually exercise in the morning, even before you have your first meal, before you break your fast, you have breakfast, then as long as that exercise is not too vigorous, it's good exercise, but not so much that you're out of breath, then your body will actually burn fat to produce that energy rather than using up your glucose or your glycogen stores. So if you want to try to lose some weight, a 10-minute walk in the morning is going to have a much greater effect than a 10-minute walk in the evening. Now, one of the best forms of exercise that has become popular today is called high-intensity interval training. And as it sounds, you're doing some exercise that's very high intensity, basically as hard and as fast as you can go, but then it's done in an interval where you also have cycles where you rest in between to recover. And a common one that is, my number's a little off here from my PowerPoint, but it says we can do, say you go at either run or cycle or anything as hard and as fast as you can possibly do it, and that might be a different level for different people depending on what level you are in physical fitness. Maybe 20 seconds of high intensity activity, and then take typically around 60 seconds to recover. And then you do that in a cycle, say, of 6 times. That's actually very common. But there's also, especially for people who are particularly in poor health, sometimes going for 20 seconds as hard as you can is too hard for some people, and that's okay. Another one that is being used today by a lot of physical therapists and so forth is doing just simply 7 seconds of high-intensity exercise, and then having a recovery cycle of 14 seconds. And you can do that in 7 different interval cycles. And if that's too much for you, well, then try to do as hard of an exercise as you can do for 7 seconds, and then take as long as you need to recover. And then do another cycle of 7 seconds, and then do as long. But this is really, running as fast as you possibly can, or if you're on a bike, biking as fast as you possibly can for this 7-second cycle. And some people, they might be so out of shape or not used to exercising that they might do 7 seconds of this high interval training, and it might take them 14 minutes to recover before they can do another 7 seconds. But if you do it and you commit to doing it regularly, you'll find that your recovery period actually starts to shorten. And actually, the measure of your health is not how hard you or how fast you can go during the high intensity. The measure of your fitness is actually based on how long it takes you to recover. And during that recovery, it's very important for our bodies, because when we're doing this high intense exercise, the pyruvate that's being processed as the glucose is coming into the cells, as your body is drawing on its nutrients to try to do this exercise, can build up where the body can't use the pyruvate at the end of the cycle as fast as it possibly can be burned. And so it gets converted into what's called lactic acid. Has anybody ever heard of lactic acid? Lactic acid is what's going to make you feel sore and tired. And when we take this recovery interval in between each high-intensity exercise, during the recovery period, that lactic acid gets cycled back through the blood to the liver, and then the liver transforms it back into pyruvate, and it becomes, again, the fuel for the powerhouse of the cell that produces the 36 units of energy. So this high exercise and rest, high exercise and rest is actually one of the best ways that we can try to improve our fitness, and also we will be actually getting much more oxygen into our body through this cycle to give us energy and to have our hearts beating strongly. Now, something else that affects this process of what's going on in the cells is any acid-producing foods that we eat increases the acidity of the inner cell, and that magnifies the lactic acidosis. So foods that are acid-producing tend to be, as it turns out, animal-based products, especially meat and dairy, cheese, and eggs are some of the most acidic foods, and they produce an acidic environment in your digestive tract and ultimately in your blood and then in your cells as a consequence of eating these foods. And in general, most plants actually produce an alkaline environment in our bodies. And they will reduce the acidity of our blood and also the acidity of the cell, and that will actually enable every cell in our body to produce more energy and to work more efficiently. It actually takes 1,200 calories just to digest a meal. So if we're trying to get the maximization of our energy in our body, then we don't generally want to exercise while we have, right after we've eaten, because then your digestive system will compete for the blood that's needed in the other parts of your body, especially in your muscles, as you're trying to exercise. Another key to have our cells be able to properly produce energy and thus have our hearts beating healthy and strong is to have proper hydration. Every cell in our body, inside the cell, we have what's called mitochondria. The mitochondria are these powerhouses that are producing the energy in our bodies, and in that cycle of producing energy in the mitochondria requires water, pure, clean water, not water diluted and mixed with other things, which we often, even if it's with food or with juice or anything else that we mix in our water, but your body wants just pure, clean water, ultimately, to get into the cell to lubricate the system of producing energy. There's a book by this doctor, we'll call him Dr. B, and the name of his book is Your Body's Many Cries for Water. But it's also sold under the title He's Not Sick, He's Thirsty. And it's also sold under the title Don't Treat Thirst with Medications. Many, many people in this world are dehydrated because they don't drink much water. And we really are affecting our bodies in many ways. Our detoxification process of our body is influenced by our hydration, and the ability of every cell in our body to produce energy is affected by hydration. Also, very interestingly, cellular energy production requires sodium from natural unprocessed sea salt or pink salt. How many people have heard from their doctors that they should limit their sodium intake, especially if you have a heart condition? It's a common recommendation is that we need to lower our salt intake, because supposedly that's affecting our blood sugar. But the salt that actually is bad for the health is what's called table salt. The table salt that we buy in the supermarket, and that's often on our tables and on the tables at the restaurants, is simply sodium chloride. But the salt that's found in nature is more than just two minerals, sodium chloride. The salt that's found in nature is 30% sodium and 50% chloride, but it's also 20% other minerals. And actually, that 20% other minerals includes 90 other minerals, make up that. So they're in lower proportions, some in trace amounts, but they actually play a very important role. Seawater is what's called the isotonic solution, which means it's in the balance of the nutrients in seawater is naturally in the same balance of the nutrients as it's supposed to be in your blood. And so we need those 92 minerals. And in fact, the sodium and the chloride by themselves are very harsh on the body. And the other 20% minerals that are contained in it actually work as a buffer to make the body be able to use and process the sodium properly. Even though the sodium itself is absolutely critical, we're going to see, to energy production. But you want to be getting it in a natural form, either sea salt or pink salt. And especially Celtic sea salt, if you've heard of Celtic sea salt, has only 82 minerals because 10 of those minerals actually were in such small amounts that they evaporated in the production of the salt. But still, 82 minerals is better than 2 minerals. But what's special about Celtic sea salt is it has 3 forms of magnesium: magnesium sulfate, magnesium bromide, and magnesium chloride. And we're going to see that magnesium is also, together with sodium, absolutely critical to proper energy function and thus for proper heart function. It's interesting that in the scriptures it tells us in Matthew 5:13, Jesus said, "Ye are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has lost his savor, wherewith shall it be salted? It is therefore good for nothing but to be cast out and to be trodden underfoot." So what is salt that's lost its savor? The salt that's lost its savor is the one that has had those 90 other minerals removed from it and just leaves behind sodium and chloride, which is actually what's in a lot of the salt that appears especially in processed food. And that has many deleterious effects on our body. When we take table salt and we consume that sodium chloride gets into our blood, and our body is constantly measuring and testing the blood to make sure it stays in a very precise balance that the body needs. And when that sodium chloride gets into our blood, our body goes, "Oh, I recognize that, but it's missing 90 minerals." So what does the body do? It needs to balance out the blood. The body then signals for other processes in the body where those minerals are stripped out of your bones to bring those minerals into the blood, to bring your blood back into balance. And now you're actually weakening your bones as you're actually taking that table salt. That table salt, that just sodium chloride without anything else with it, or sometimes they feel a little guilty and they add one more mineral, iodine. But we need the 92 minerals in the right balance that's found in nature. And so our bodies need this healthy mineral rich, and among those minerals are magnesium and potassium. And so table salt, just the sodium chloride, actually raises our blood pressure. And that's why doctors tell you to limit your sodium intake. But when that sodium has the full balance of minerals found in sea salt or in pink salt, instead of raising our blood pressure, that that sea salt actually lowers your blood pressure because of the magnesium and the potassium that are in the minerals. So as we drink our water, if we take a little pinch of Celtic sea salt, or even regular sea salt or pink salt, with every glass of water, that will actually help us to maintain that proper balance in our blood. Yes?
Do you think that's perhaps why older people sometimes break their bones more easily?
Yes, it does contribute to osteoporosis and to brittle bones. Absolutely. And especially the older you get, you have a lifetime of effects, so it becomes more dramatic. There are other things, but it's one of the contributing factors, absolutely, to brittle bones. Yes, brother?
The Celtic is okay because you know already when you buy the brand. But how can you determine if the sea salt that you are buying is the one with the high level of minerals like the 92 and it's not like the one just with the 2 minerals?
Yes. So how do we know what salt's good salt, I think is essentially the question. So there's a brand called Celtic Sea Salt that has this extra magnesium in it that's really good. But first of all, if it says unrefined sea salt, because sea salt can actually be refined, and we don't want that. We want it to be unrefined, so all the minerals are there. Or pink salt, like Himalayan pink salt. But even there's Himalayan pink salt can sometimes be a little more expensive. Some might say it's worth it, but in America here we have something that's called, it's literally, the brand is called real salt. You might see it at the supermarket. You can definitely find it at Whole Foods or probably at Sprouts, I imagine, but you might even be able to get it at Publix, quite possibly. Yes, and so that real salt, it's coming from the salt mines in Utah, and that's real pink salt, and it has a full blend of minerals in it. So as long as it's pink, that's probably good.
How much we need every day?
How much salt do we need? That's a great question. The short answer is what tastes good. You know, if you're making a meal and you accidentally spill, you know, way too much salt into your meal, well, what does that taste like? Not very good. And if you have a bland meal that has no salt in it whatsoever, how does that taste? Not very good. But if you have, you know, you salt to what tastes good, that's typically what you need with your body. You know, I would say either you need at least a pinch of salt with every, you know, 8 to 12 ounce glass of water. Or if you had a gallon, you could put, you know, up to a teaspoon of good salt into a gallon of water, and then that would be good. Any more than that would probably be too much. So, yes.
Also, an optimal solution with somebody with a kidney dysfunction or something that we are just talking about, like a regular individual with no health.
Yeah, we would probably have to adjust how we deal with someone with kidney dysfunction, yes, for sure. But sea salt I mean, in World War II, they actually, when they were fighting on the islands in the Pacific, when they ran out of blood plasma, one of the things that they used to save people's lives was literally seawater. Or if they could get it, they would use the coconut water that was grown on the edge of the ocean and that had been taking up the minerals from the sea, and then that water inside the coconut, they literally would use it as an IV directly into the blood because it has the right isotonic balance of minerals. So we don't want to drink seawater, but we want to get the sea salt. Yes?
Just a question. So when we're cooking, and this might sound like a dumb question, when we're cooking and we put the salt in, does that make the salt lose its
No, no, using the salt in our cooking should, the minerals are preserved, yes. So minerals aren't alive, they're inorganic. You know, when we cook things, when we heat things, that can actually limit the availability of vitamins and enzymes in the food, because vitamins and enzymes are alive, but minerals are inorganic, and they should remain in our food when we use it.
So if you have a bottle of magnesium capsules
Yes.
and it's outdated a couple of years, do you think the mineral of magnesium is decreased?
Probably slightly, but not a lot. I wouldn't think it would dramatically reduce if that's all it was.
Because it's inorganic mineral.
That's right, yes, yes. So what's important about sodium, other than these extra minerals that we're supposed to get with the sodium, that sodium itself is one of the key nutrients without which we cannot have life. Glucose cannot cross the brush border of the stomach lining to enter the blood without a transport molecule of sodium. So all along our gut lining are what's called a brush border, a little villi, and it's through that the nutrients get absorbed into the blood. And the glucose, that is the breakdown product of your digestion, that needs to get into the blood to get into the cell so that your body can operate properly, that glucose cannot cross that stomach lining without sodium. So think about the consequences of the recommendation to have no sodium. It's actually going to make you nutrient deficient, and your energy levels are going to crash, and it's going to cause all kinds of related consequences to our health. So sodium is very important. Magnesium is responsible for over 400 enzymatic functions in the body that are absolutely critical to the proper functioning. Magnesium is critical in particular to proper heart function. So many different factors are going into the operation of our bodies and of our hearts. But in particular, calcium is the main mineral that the body uses in muscles to cause the muscle to contract. And magnesium is the main mineral that the body uses to cause that muscle to relax. And it's the rhythm of contraction and relaxation that actually enables the pumping of the blood. And so if we don't have proper levels of magnesium, then we're not going to have a proper pumping of our blood in our hearts. And we can actually get heart arrhythmia if we have an imbalance between the calcium and the magnesium. Now, a lot of people in this world eat a lot of things that they probably shouldn't and drink a lot of things that they probably shouldn't, especially animal-based products that produce a lot of acid in our stomachs. And so what do? People take an antacid to try to buffer their stomach, and that antacid is largely often calcium. Calcium supplements are also very much promoted by doctors today. But the problem is that creates an imbalance because most people are actually magnesium deficient because they're not eating the foods that are high in magnesium, especially dark leafy greens. Praise God, some of us eat dark leafy greens and love them, but many people don't eat many dark leafy greens, and they're not getting the magnesium that they need. And they're also often not having the right kind of salt. So we want to we can test the levels of these things in our body. It tends to be that calcium tends to be high and magnesium tends to be low. And that's really going to affect the proper functioning of the pumping of our heart muscles. Magnesium is also very important because it's called what's hydrophilic. Hydro means connected with water, philic means lover. And so magnesium likes water. It absorbs water. So that Celtic sea salt, if you actually put it in a bowl uncovered and put it on the counter, if it rained outside, if you came back and checked that bowl, that Celtic sea salt would actually become very moist because it's actually drawing the water in, because that's one of the attributes of the magnesium in it. But when we get the magnesium in our blood, actually draws water, and when that magnesium crosses the cell membrane into the cell, it draws water with it into the cell, and that actually helps to dramatically produce increased energy in our bodies. So magnesium is very important to this process. Magnesium also, again, helps to lower our blood pressure. This constriction that's happening in our blood vessels that's leading to the high blood pressure is partially relaxed as a consequence of magnesium, which is a muscle relaxant. Now, other things we need to consider is that any drink or product that is high in caffeine leaches minerals from the body, including both calcium and magnesium. So it's everybody's individual choice how they treat their bodies and whether they have these things, but you have to understand if you're drinking coffee or caffeinated tea or other caffeinated beverages, that actually is going to contribute possibly to an irregular heartbeat and to high blood pressure. And it's especially because of this leaching effect of the minerals in the body. It also, caffeine does give us a temporary sensation of having more energy, but it's actually very deceptive because what it's actually doing is stimulating our adrenal glands to produce adrenaline and cortisol. And adrenaline is where we get that kind of fight or flight response. That's actually why a lot of people who are drinking a lot of coffee or caffeinated tea are often a little bit on edge. I don't know if you've ever encountered people like that, but they don't quite realize that the beverage that they're using to try to feel like they're alive or have some energy is actually making them very irritable because they're actually triggering a hormonal response that is making them like they're ready to fight you or they want to run away from you. And that's really not a great way to interact with people. And also the cortisol is what actually triggers the body often to produce what's called visceral fat around our organs, and that's the worst kind of fat that none of us want to have. So the stress response that comes from caffeine is actually has negative consequences for us. Now, that caffeine also is, what was I going to say about the caffeine?
Oxygen?
No, I'll come back to it. I lost it for a moment. It does have an acidic effect on the body, yes, and most of the drinks connected with it themselves are acidic. And the caffeine is going to...
The spiders drink caffeine?
It'll come back to me. So let's press on for time. The arterial plaques that form through the accumulation of animal-based fats, oxidized cholesterol, calcium, and cellular waste products, and fibrin along the arterial walls of blood vessels. Everybody heard of arterial plaques? That's how you get arterial sclerosis. You get this buildup on the inside of your arteries in your body, and that actually makes them, it reduces their flexibility and how supple they are, and it also constricts the blood flow, and that actually is what raises your blood pressure and can also create the potential for heart attacks. Now, it's a combination of all of these things: animal-based fats, oxidized cholesterol, calcium, cellular waste products, and what's called fibrin. But fibrin is what's called a non-globular protein that is actually like a fiber, kind of holds these plaques together so that they can stick to the sides of our arteries. And the body produces enzymes, especially from the pancreas, that can actually digest these fibrin proteins and thus help to flush away these plaques before they build up. The problem arises is that if we eat too much protein, especially animal-based protein, and too much oxidized fat, our pancreatic enzymes are needed to digest our food, and there's no extra of those enzymes to circulate through your blood vessels to actually digest this fibrin so that the plaques don't build up. But fortunately, God is merciful, and there are foods, particularly apricot seeds and bitter almonds, not sweet almonds, bitter almonds, that have plant-based enzymes that work symbiotically with the enzymes from the pancreas. And if you actually have a few apricot seeds every day, it will actually help to break down those plaques and help your blood vessels become more supple and flexible, and actually will help to reduce your blood pressure and make you much healthier. Apricot seeds. So inside an apricot is a big, hard shell, but inside that shell is a tiny seed that kind of looks like an almond, but a little bit smaller. It tends to be a little bit more bitter because the substance and the enzymes in it that are beneficial actually are what producing that bitter taste. And the same substance that makes almonds bitter is this same idea, and it helps and it aids with this protein digestion. They literally, these protein fibrins that are in your blood vessels literally will get digested by these enzymes if they can circulate. So, and again, our pancreas is supposed to produce enzymes that do this job, but if we're eating a lot of protein in our food, especially animal protein, all of those enzymes just have to go to digest the food, and there's none left over to circulate through the body to have these other effects. Some other things, there's a great misunderstanding of the effects of cholesterol in the body today and among the advice of physicians. Cholesterol is actually produced in our bodies. It's produced by the liver. It can also come from foods, particularly animal-based products. There's plant-based cholesterols, plant sterols, which are different from animal-based cholesterol. And the liver itself actually produces cholesterol. Our bodies need cholesterol, actually. So it actually plays a very important role in the health of our bodies. And when the liver produces cholesterol, 80% comes from glucose. It actually processes glucose in the liver to produce the cholesterol. And only 20% is coming from the fat that we're consuming that is used to make the cholesterol in the body. So if we supposedly have too high cholesterol, is it because we're eating too much fat or we're eating too much sugar? It's actually because we're eating too much sugar. And especially refined sugar is actually going to raise your cholesterol. And now there's two types of cholesterol we may have heard of, HDL and LDL. They stand for high-density lipoprotein and low-density lipoprotein. And they actually have these functions in the body. The high-density lipoprotein, the one that's supposedly good, is the one that carries away the excess cholesterol from the arteries to prevent it from building up too high. That's why it's considered the, quote, good cholesterol, is because it keeps your cholesterol from getting too high in the arteries. But the low-density lipoprotein, the one that's, quote, supposedly the bad one, actually plays the role of repairing and rebuilding your arterial wall damage. So there are many things in this life now that actually cause damage to the walls of our arteries. They can actually become holes in the walls of our arteries, and it's quite a serious problem. And so your body has a function to repair those damaged arterial walls, and that's what the low-density lipoprotein actually does. In fact, it's low density that causes it to stick more to the side of the arterial wall, while the high-density lipoproteins tend to stay in the middle of the arterial blood, because they're the ones that have been designed to take the products away, so they tend to stay in the middle, while the low density tends to stick to the sides. That's why it's supposedly the problem. But if cholesterol is building up on the sides of your arteries. Why is that happening? Because so much damage is being caused to your arterial walls, and your body's trying to repair the damage. And so the problem isn't we have too much LDL cholesterol. The problem is we're causing too much damage to our arteries that needs repair, and our bodies can't properly do the repair work. So what are the things that cause damage to our arterial wall lining? One of the number one is smoking. Smoking and tobacco causes great damage. Also, smoking tobacco is going to damage your lungs, and it's going to limit the amount of oxygen that's getting into your blood, and that's feeding the powerhouse of energy in every cell in your body. So we really want to get rid of that. But there's others, like air pollution, particulate matter, that the more city and industrial area that you live in or that you spend time in regularly, and there's more air pollution there, that's actually going to cause damage to the lining of your arteries. And that's going to affect how your body is producing and processing cholesterol. Mercury, environmental sources of mercury include certain fish, especially tuna and salmon these days tend to have bioaccumulated mercury. Mercury in every form and in every amount is toxic to the body. It's actually also a neurotoxin, a brain toxin. We don't want that. There's also tends to be mercury in a lot of old fillings in our teeth that constantly is being leached into our food as we're chewing, and as especially we eat hot things or drink hot things. That can help leach some of the mercury that's in our fillings. They have some dentists today that actually specialize in removing mercury fillings and then replacing them with more inert substances. You really want, if you're going to consider doing something like that, you really want to go to somebody who does that as a specialty, because they'll have special equipment to try to capture that mercury to make sure you don't actually swallow it and actually increase the level of mercury in your system as you're trying to get rid of it. Also, things like fungus, yeast and mold and mildew. If we're exposed to too much in that, we're going to end up having damage to our arterial walls. So we want to make sure to deal with mold and mildew issues as they arise in our homes. And if it's not at a safe level, then we need to get out of there until it's remedied. It's quite a serious issue to our health. Now, another thing that we need to consider is the main treatment from the medical world today to deal with supposedly too high cholesterol is what's called heart statins. Yes? We've all heard of heart statins. Lipitor is probably the most famous one in the world at the time. But the scientific research tells us that heart statins have never been proven to prevent heart disease. Never. There is no study by anyone ever that has shown a true benefit for your heart in preventing heart disease as a consequence of taking heart statins. Heart disease is not a deficiency of heart medications. So we want to get to the root of the matter. Heart statins actually block the pathway in the liver that produces cholesterol. That's actually how they lower cholesterol, is there's this pathway in your liver that's naturally producing cholesterol, but we saw cholesterol is actually playing a very important role. It's repairing the arterial damage to the lining of your arteries, and it's also taking away the excess products in the HDL. And so if we actually block the pathway in our liver that's producing cholesterol, then that process of repair in our arteries is not going to function properly. It's also the case that, I think it's on the next slide actually, but cholesterol is the basis for almost all of the hormones in our body. So if we're blocking the pathway in our liver that produces cholesterol, you're going to be affecting the hormone levels in your entire body, and that will cause all kinds of cascading health problems. That liver pathway also, that same liver pathway that produces cholesterol also produces an enzyme called CoQ10. You may have seen this supplement you can now get in the pharmacy and so forth, called CoQ10, that's actually marketed as being vital to heart health. And it is vital to heart health. But if you're taking heart statins, you're actually damaging that natural process in your body that's designed to keep your heart healthy. Doesn't seem like something to take to help have a healthy heart. If you go to the pharmaceutical company's own warning label about the main heart statin Lipitor, it will tell you it causes muscle wasting, memory loss, dementia, Alzheimer's, and breast cancer. These don't sound like things that I want. I don't know about you. It's your choice, but there is a natural way to deal with our cholesterol levels that doesn't require taking these medications that have unbelievable side effects. And the very fact that it can even be marketed, and literally millions and millions of people take heart statins every day. And the own company on the label says this is the consequences of taking these medications. It's really quite shocking. A common blood thinner that's prescribed, often if we have concerns with heart health, we're prescribed blood thinners like warfarin is a very common one. But warfarin only thins the blood, but warfarin also has very serious side effects, similar to Lipitor. Another common, what's that?
Eliquis?
Yes?
Blood thinner Eliquis?
Yeah, I'm sure it's very similar. There's natural blood thinners that we can use that we're going to look at here. Because another common one that's supposedly the safest blood thinner is aspirin. And people have been prescribed low-dose aspirin for decades. But we've now found the most recent science on aspirin is that aspirin actually can cause brain bleeds. Micro brain bleeds that actually cause serious consequences in your brain and neuro damage that we want to avoid. So there we have cholesterol is critical to hormone production, including especially stress hormones. Stress hormones are going to directly affect the proper functioning of our hearts. And so if we're taking the cholesterol blocking drugs, we're actually not going to be producing those stress hormones properly. Interesting also, vitamin D is produced from cholesterol in the body. So the way our body produces vitamin D from being exposed to the sun, cholesterol is involved in that production. And vitamin D itself is critical to the repair of DNA damage. So we are all, every day, all day long, being exposed to things that are causing DNA damage at a cellular level. And that DNA damage is often, vitamin D plays a role in that repair of that DNA damage. But if we're blocking cholesterol in our body, then we're not going to have proper levels of vitamin D, and that DNA repair process is going to be inhibited. Another thing that causes damage very commonly to the walls of our arteries is hybridized wheat. Hybridized wheat. So almost all of the wheat that you buy in the supermarket today, whether it's in bread or bagels or pizza dough or cookies or pastries or you name it, almost every product you buy in the supermarket has some type of wheat in it. That wheat is what is called hybridized wheat. It's not the way wheat that God made it. The way wheat that God made it is in the next line was the einkorn wheat is the only wheat really in this world that's never been completely hybridized. That einkorn wheat thousands of years ago was naturally hybridized and became what's called emmer wheat. And then related to that also is spelt and kamut. And those are still the healthy wheats that we can have today, the ancient grains. And also, especially if they're made into sourdough, the enzymes in the sourdough in the microorganisms that are in that sourdough actually help to partially digest and break down the gluten in those wheats, and that makes it a much easier process of digestion in our body. The hybridized wheat, they hybridized it with seeming good intentions, but, you know, the ways of man, you know, as he thinks, are actually the ways of death. So in thinking to make wheat more hardy so that the crop could survive more harsh conditions, it became possibly more drought tolerant to make it so that it could survive colder frosts, and to make the wheat, especially actually back around starting in the 1950s, there became a concern that the wheat would not survive a radioactive fallout were there to be a nuclear exchange between the United States and the Soviet Union. And so they actually hybridized the wheat to supposedly make it more hardy so that it might survive in these more difficult conditions. And they actually took some of the seeds and they actually put them and exposed them to massive amounts of radiation, and which killed almost all of the seeds and made them so they couldn't germinate. But then they just took all those seeds and planted them, and the very few of them that actually sprouted, they took those and said, oh, they can survive the radiation. They must have some adaptation in that seed to deal with the radiation. And then they took those seeds and then they hybridized them to produce what's called red wheat that we find in almost all of our wheat products. But the structure of the cell in that wheat and the structure of the gluten is by nature, by design, much more tough and difficult, which then becomes much more difficult for the body to properly break down and digest, and that ends up leading to structural damage inside our body, to our gut lining, and then it can poke holes in our gut lining, and then whole food particles start getting into the bloodstream. And that can cause all kinds of allergic reactions, that can produce new food allergies, autoimmune conditions. And then it does the same thing also causes this damage to the arterial walls, which then triggers the cholesterol production to try to do the repair. Now, other things that damage the arterial walls of in our blood vessels is refined sugar and refined carbohydrates. Again, getting back to the problem of too much sugar. And of course, refined carbohydrates are almost immediately processed into glucose, into more sugar, and the blood sugar levels spike. And then, of course, that triggers the production of insulin to bring down the blood sugar levels, and the going up and down of the blood sugar levels is actually what causes serious health consequences. It's supposed to be much more of a balanced wave, but the way the foods have been hybridized is causing greater, higher spikes and lower crashes in our blood sugar. And that has deleterious effects on our health, on our heart health, and even on our mental health is actually affected. And many people that have manic episodes and things like that, it's actually connected to shifts in blood sugar. Most alcoholism is actually connected to issues with blood sugar, and they're actually drinking the alcohol to get the sugar in the alcohol, and they don't even realize. And they have a drink, and their blood sugar spikes, the insulin kicks in, it crashes, and what do? I need another drink. And if you actually treat the blood sugar problems, 70% of them become sober, which is the next closest system in the world is AA, is somewhere between 20 and 25% success rate. So perhaps we ought to consider the sugar. And of course, alcohol and tobacco themselves both damage the heart. And we're almost done here. Very important issue is the issue of monosodium glutamate, MSG. Anybody ever heard of MSG? Yes, some people call it the Chinese food system syndrome. And yes, it is sometimes in Chinese food, but monosodium glutamate is all throughout our food system. And the problem with monosodium glutamate is not the sodium, the problem is the glutamate. Glutamate is a neurotransmitter, like serotonin and dopamine and norepinephrine are neurotransmitters. Glutamate is also a neurotransmitter. And glutamate is actually the most common neurotransmitter in our body. Just about every single function in our body and every single organ in our body has glutamate receptors by which the brain can signal to tell the body what to do. So glutamate is critical that your brain remains in control of the rest of your body. If your glutamate levels are off, then the signaling system from your brain to your body breaks down. And that's what happens when we have this massive amounts of free glutamate that get released with something, when we have monosodium glutamate or any form. There's actually many other forms of free glutamate, of proteins. Glutamate actually is a protein. It's an amino acid that comes from proteins. But proteins, by God's design, are in complex molecular structures that take time to break down and slowly release the amino acids so that the body can use them properly. And the body very carefully regulates those levels, especially the levels of glutamate, because it plays this signaling role in the body. But when we get free glutamate, those levels can spike 50 times the level that they're normally at or more. And it can cause serious problems because, again, every organ in your body has glutamate receptors, including your heart. Your autonomic nervous system, which is what's controlling the automatic functions of your body, like your heartbeat, is signaling continually from your brain to your heart to tell your heart to contract and to relax. And if you have something that's high in MSG and you eat it or you drink it, and your levels of glutamate spike in your blood, that can actually start causing your heart to beat out of order irregularly. And it can actually trigger a heart attack even. And how many people have read a story or saw on the news about some young kid running down the basketball court and suddenly he collapsed and had a heart attack? And they said, oh, he had a heart condition and we never knew. No, he was chugging Gatorade on the sideline, which is full of MSG, and it caused his heart to actually start beating out of order and triggered a heart attack because of the stress on his heart. It's a very serious issue, and glutamate, free glutamate, is put in almost all the foods under secret names. There's probably more than 40 or 50 secret names that the food companies legally are allowed to put on the label to mask the MSG. Names like natural flavors, and stock, and broth, and textured vegetable protein, and yeast extract. And there's websites that have whole lists of these things. And I read every label to try to limit as much as possible because they're adding it to all the food. The reason why they're adding it to all the food is because your tongue also is full of glutamate receptors. So if you eat a food that's high in free glutamate, no matter what that food tastes like otherwise, your body goes, delicious, because your tongue is being stimulated by the glutamate. But it's a false signal that's actually tricking the body. And they actually discovered this. It's an interesting story, that there's a seaweed, a kombu seaweed, out near Japan that's naturally high in glutamate. And they use it in their cooking there to make things taste better. And though it's higher than most foods, it's still not so high that it's damaging. It's still a natural product in the world. But then they take that seaweed and they process it and they mill it and they produce the free glutamate. And then during World War II, they were adding this flavor enhancer to all of the military rations of the Japanese soldiers. And as the American soldiers were finally starting to win in the Pacific and they started taking large captives of the Japanese, they got their rations and they very quickly realized that the Japanese rations tasted way better than anything among the American foods. And so they actually put a general in charge to figure out, why does their food taste better than our food? And the general put a study together, and they figured out it was because of this glutamate from the kombu seaweed that was making it taste so great. And that general, when he produced his report, immediately was commanded to call every major food company in America and tell them about this great discovery of this wonderful flavor-enhancing substance that they've discovered. But now they've produced artificial ways of refining the glutamate from many other sources other than this seaweed, and they're adding it into almost all the food to make it taste better, especially things like processed food and canned food, which tends not to taste nearly as good as fresh food. So staying away from those center aisles where the processed food is found, and staying to those outer aisles where you have the fresh fruits and vegetables, will help us to avoid the glutamate. A wonderful resource for this is a Dr. Russell Blaylock. If you search on his name, and he has a book and also a series of lectures called The Taste That Kills. The Taste That Kills. He goes through the whole history of this, and he actually goes through the whole science of glutamate. Glutamate is a very serious problem in this world. For decades, they were also adding it to the baby food and to the formula, until they found out that the glutamate controls the whole process of neurodevelopment in the growing brain. And when you spike the levels, it actually affects the way the neurons interconnect in the brain and causes serious problems. The meiotic process, when the DNA from the mother and the father cross over and combine to produce the sex cells in our body, is controlled by glutamate. So too high glutamate levels can actually even cause things like Down syndrome. It's a very serious issue, and it's almost unknown because they don't talk about it because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. So what are some of the good things that we can do to stay healthy and have healthy hearts as we close? One of the key herbs that is well known to be very, very good for our hearts is called hawthorn. There can be hawthorn berries, hawthorn leaves, and hawthorn stems. Different supplements have different ones in them, and the best is to have a supplement that has all three blended together because they have slightly different effects. But all hawthorn helps to strengthen the heart, and it helps to heal many heart conditions, including heart arrhythmia, high blood pressure, and low blood pressure. If you have high blood pressure and you take hawthorn, it'll help bring it down. If you have low blood pressure and you take hawthorn, it'll help bring it up. Only God can design something like that. And this is a wonderful herb. It has no known toxicity. You can take as much as you need to help have a healthy heart. It will help to reset the proper rhythm of your heart if it's off. A wonderful natural blood thinner that we can use rather than using the warfarin or the aspirin or the one you mentioned, brother, is cayenne pepper. Cayenne pepper is one of the most powerful natural blood thinners in the world. It opens the capillaries, and it actually can stop a heart attack in as little as 60 seconds. If you know somebody or you suspect somebody is having a heart attack, if you can get some cayenne pepper, if they're conscious, then take a teaspoon of that cayenne pepper, mix it in a glass of water, and have them drink it quick. Or if they're unconscious, you can take the cayenne pepper and just put it under their tongue, and it will actually absorb sublingually. And every drop of blood in your body circulates through your entire body in 60 seconds. So as soon as you get that cayenne pepper in, it will immediately go into the bloodstream, and it can stop the heart attack within 60 seconds. And it really is powerful. It's something good that you can have every day. There's no toxicity with it as well. And if you don't like the hot taste, well, then you can get it in pill form, and you won't have that. Or if you like it, then you can enjoy a little spicy food in your life. But cayenne pepper is truly medicine. None of the other hot peppers have the same effect. So chili pepper and habanero pepper, they might be spicy, but they don't have this same heart blood thinning effect that cayenne pepper does. And the higher the heat units, the more effective it is. Ginger also is a very good blood thinner, and it's also anti-inflammatory, which is very good for your heart. Fresh garlic helps you to maintain a healthy heart. Having a good balance of plant-based omega-3 fats in our diet, especially if we want them plant-based. The animal-based fats tend to get oxidized, and that oxidation is what causes the harmful byproducts. It's what makes, when a fat oxidizes, it's what we call rancid. We don't want the fats inside of us becoming rancid. So we want to avoid that oxidation. And that oxidation happens more frequently with animal-based products, but even plant-based products can be oxidized, and we need to be careful of that. So great sources for omega-3 fatty acids from the plant world. One of the best is flax seeds, especially you got to grind them, though it's best to actually grind them daily because they will ultimately become oxidized if they sit around too long in the air. Chia seeds, walnuts, those are probably the top three, and also things like avocado, olives, olive oil, and coconut oil. Seaweed as for omega-3s. That's a good question. I'm not sure about that. I know seaweed it has the same excellent mineral balance that we find in the sea salt, and it actually can be a salt alternative. Yes. Okay. Amen. I would say in general, eating as much of different kinds of seaweed as possible is one of the healthiest things that we can do. And we ought to eat a lot more seaweed. And it's because of this perfectly balanced mineral levels in the seawater that makes the plants that grow there to have these wonderful health properties. And seawater is the same everywhere in the world. It's really quite miraculous. If the natural balance that is maintained in the seawater, if any particular place starts to get higher levels of a certain mineral, that mineral immediately leaches to the bottom, so that the water itself always stays in the same balance of minerals that are actually designed for our health by a loving God. Another anti-inflammatory substance that's really good for our heart health is turmeric. And turmeric dramatically increases its anti-inflammatory properties when it's added together with black pepper. Now, as Adventists, we generally discourage the use of black pepper because it can irritate the stomach lining. So we don't want to have lots of black pepper in our diet, but when it's combined with turmeric, it actually does have a beneficial effect where it's worth any potential negative effects. And a lot of supplements, if you get turmeric supplements in a pill form, will have black pepper mixed into it. Also for heart health is one of the big things that damages our hearts is not proper sleep. When we're not getting proper sleep, especially in the hours before midnight, it dramatically affects our melatonin production. And our melatonin production is directly related to our heart health. And so, as we talk about, every hour of sleep before midnight has the beneficial effect of 2 hours of sleep after midnight because of its consequences related to melatonin production. And finally, hot and cold contrast showers. Everybody heard of hot and cold contrast showers? So you turn up the heat in the shower as hot as you can tolerate it. Not so hot that you get burned, but as hot as you can tolerate it. And you keep that on for as long as 3 minutes. And then you can do it as little as 60 seconds, or you can do it as much as 3 minutes. And then you cycle to 20 to 30 seconds of as cold as you can tolerate. You know, and you get to decide what you can tolerate. No one is deciding this for you. And then you cycle back and forth between them. And this actually has a very beneficial effect on our health, on our immune system, and on our heart health. And it's very, very simple. And ideally, when you go through that cycle, you actually, the tough part is you want to end on the cold, if you can. The tendency is to want to end on the hot. So somewhere between 1 minute and 3 minutes hot, and then maybe 20 to 30 seconds cold. And you can go back and forth at least 3 times or more. And this is one of the most powerful ways to stimulate your immune system. And the positive healing effects of that boost in immunity also affects your heart health. So we want to do that. And if you're struggling to go cold, well then maybe if you get the heat part so hot that it's almost too hot, not too hot, but almost too hot, then you'll almost look for the refreshing release of the cold at the end. And so this is a very simple way to do what's called hydrotherapy, which any therapy that involves using water as part of that therapy is a form of hydrotherapy. And this is a very simple way to help us maintain heart health. Any last questions? Oh, praise God. Here, maybe one more word of prayer. Thank you, Lord, for your goodness. Thank you for giving us wisdom in these last days to understand these things. Help us to understand how our bodies operate, how they work, so that we can cooperate with you in making right decisions that can dramatically affect our health for good or for evil. So help us to cooperate with you in making healthy choices, that we might be strong to be witnesses for you, and that we might have vibrant, healthy lives as you desire for each one of us. And most especially, help us not to just be healthy sinners, but help us to learn to have a true love relationship with you, that we actually might have a saving love relationship for all eternity is our prayer. May it be in Jesus' name. Amen. Yeah, sure. Oh, actually, one last thing I should say, too, is a lot of this information I got actually from a wonderful Adventist physician. Her name is Dr. Barbara O'Neill. And if you search on the name Dr. Barbara O'Neill on YouTube, on just in general or on any health topic, very quickly some videos will come up, and she's one of the most amazing natural healers that I've ever encountered. She has amazing presentations.